Recently, Nicki Minaj and Don Lemon, two people who should have nothing to discuss, got into a heated back and forth filled with inflammatory, bigoted dog whistles on both sides after Nicki Minaj decided to attack Don Lemon for covering anti-ICE protests. Nicki jumped out the window and called Don Lemon a cocksucker, and Don Lemon responded by calling her an undocumented immigrant who should be deported. This entire exchange and the discourse that surrounded it has been problematic and tone deaf as fuck, and I'm going to break down why. But before I can do that, I first have to give y'all some background on how and why we've even come to a place where Nicki Minaj, of all people, is attacking a journalist for covering anti-ICE protests in the first place. If you haven't been following Nicki Minaj's descent into madness, let me update you on the current happenings of this nut bitch. Nicki Minaj has been torpedoing her legacy and reputation for years now through her ongoing attacks against younger female rappers whose success she cannot stand, as well as her association and defense of sex offenders, like that of her husband Kenneth Petty, who was previously incarcerated for raping a girl and also murdering a man. But in 2025, Nicki came out as a full-blown MAGA grifter, and that grift began with her parroting Republican propaganda about a Christian genocide in Nigeria, a dangerous lie the Republicans could not wait to have her parrot at the United fucking Nations to help them manufacture consent to attack Nigeria for their own nefarious means. I have another video on this channel titled Nicki Minaj is helping Trump lie about Nigeria that goes into more detail, so you're free to watch that when you're done here. It's important to note that since Nicki Minaj's appearance at the UN, the US has striked Nigeria. Nicki Minaj culminated her right-wing grift by appearing on Turning Point USA with the wife of the late white supremacist Charlie Kirk, where she unintelligently babbled through conservative propaganda and dog whistles that she barely had a working grasp of. I talked about this in much greater depth on Matt Bernstein's podcast, A Bit Fruity, so you should also check that out if you want to hear more about my analysis of everything she had to say at Turning Points USA, as well as just all her garbage. But what I will say here is that Nicki Minaj practices what's called grievance politics. And Nicki Minaj doesn't just practice grievance politics with respect to her literal politics. It's how she moves through absolutely every facet of her public-facing life. And it's why she's bitter, insufferable, reactionary, and destructive. When I say someone practices grievance politics, I am referring to someone who takes perceived slights, wrongs, or injustices they've faced, and they use it to justify hate or resentment towards a group of people, or to inform how they react. That's Nicki Minaj to a motherfucking T. It's how and why she justifies hating every woman in rap, no matter how far they try to deep throat her. And it's also why she's tap dancing for the Republicans right now. Well, that, and I genuinely do believe Nicki Minaj is very obviously not all there in the head anymore. And I personally do believe the rumors that she's coked out of her mind. I don't know Nicki Minaj. I don't know Nicki Minaj, but I do know cokeheads. And I do know what it looks like to fly into a coked out rage. And she and the cokeheads I know looking real familiar. But putting speculation about Nicki Minaj's personal wellness aside, we know that Nicki has all kind of legal issues and financial issues as a result of who she decided to marry. Nicki Minaj quite literally just narrowly avoided the foreclosure of her $20 million home by paying at the last minute the $500,000 judgment she and her husband owed to a security guard who sued them in 2019 after Nicki's husband assaulted him. And they also have other issues, including but not limited to a lawsuit accusing both Nicki and her husband of harassing his rape victim. Remember what I said about grievance politics and how it affects everything in her public-facing life? Now think about grievance politics with respect to her alleged harassment of her husband's victim and trying to bully that woman into silence, thus the lawsuit. Think about grievance politics with respect to the real reason she has a problem with California Governor Gavin Newsom. And it's simply because he tweeted out support for Megan Thee Stallion's diss track Hiss. Nicki's commitment to grievance politics and feeling like everybody owes her something moves her to the kind of extremes that has her tap dancing for the Republicans. Nicki genuinely seems to believe that she is someone that the Democrats, people in power, and niggas like the governor should be running to help. Nicki goes wherever she thinks her ass is being kissed the most and who is most willing to help her. And the Republicans love a puppet. They love a puppet. So they always entertain and legitimize her cokehead Twitter rants. And that's all Nicki needs to go over there. It's quid pro quo in her nut ass mind. I promise y'all that Nicki Minaj does not give a single fuck about anything she's talking about. She doesn't care about Christianity, conservatism, ICE, immigration, trans people, boys, girls, not a single goddamn talking point that she's getting from the Republicans. She is simply dancing like puppets do. But it doesn't matter whether she truly cares or believes anything she's saying or advocating for. Not caring about the wicked shit that your dancing will help the people pulling your strings accomplish is just as bad, because the result is the same. Now that you're up to date on who Nicki is now, a morally bankrupt rapper who's turning to doing conservative propaganda for a fascist regime under the guise of Christianity in hopes that the fascists will bail her out of her personal, legal, and financial troubles, that brings us to why this idiot bitch decided to fuck with Don Lemon. So for background, former CNN anchor Don Lemon now covers the news independently on his YouTube channel. So recently, he was covering an anti-ICE protest at a Minnesota church. Now, because Nicki's new job is helping Republicans do evil shit by claiming Christian persecution and lying, Nicki Minaj decided to respond to Don Lemon going live to cover this anti-ICE protest at a Minnesota church by acting like this protest and the coverage of it was a specific affront to Christians. She tweeted out, "Don cocksucking Lemon is disgusting. How dare you? I want that thug in jail. He would never do that to any other religion. Lock him up." There is so much to unpack here. The dog whistles are fucking screaming. But I am going to start from her decision to frame this anti-ICE protest at a Minnesota church as an attack on Christians, because that's exactly how she and conservatives intentionally reframe the violence in Nigeria as targeting Christians specifically, which is not only a lie, but it's a lie that speaks directly to the uniquely American belief that if something targets, offends, or harms Christians, that somehow justifies whatever comes next. That suddenly the American government is no longer constrained by either its own laws or the sovereignty of other nations. They reframe issues as targeting Christians because they know that Americans will think America has some kind of divine authority to invade independent nations and murder people if they say it's on behalf of Christianity. Just like Nicki Minaj knows that if she frames Don Lemon and these anti-ICE protests as disrespecting Christians, when she then calls for his arrest, many Americans will not care that she has no legal basis to do so, and that what she's calling for is actually a violation of the First Amendment. Similarly, that's why Nicki's wicked ass didn't just call for Don Lemon's arrest. She called him a thug and she called him a cocksucker right out the gate. So let's get into the reasons why. Y'all already know that thug is conservatives' new word for black, so we don't even have to get into the level of anti-blackness there. But calling Don Lemon a cocksucker is just Nicki Minaj shining her bat signal in the sky to remind the homophobes and conservatives that she's performing for that Don Lemon is gay, and thus the enemy, so they should be against him on that ground alone. She is signaling to them that they don't have to engage this argument on the merits. They can simply fight on identity, us versus them. That's why she invoked Christianity and homophobia in the same breath. She's saying that we're Christians and he's gay, so we have the moral high ground. It doesn't matter that there's nothing Christian about calling someone a dick sucker or ICE killing people, tearing apart families, and throwing people out of the country they built their lives in. So before I move on to Don Lemon's response and the fundamental problems with his response, let me make clear that Nicki Minaj is an unprincipled, dangerous, idiot bitch who doesn't have even a semblance of moral clarity to be doing what she's doing when the costs are people's actual fucking lives. Nicki does not only deserve to be dragged, she needs to be dragged. And I want her to be dragged. I cannot stand Nicki's ass. But you not only can drag her without being xenophobic, you must drag her without being xenophobic, especially if you're attempting to drag her for what is ultimately a xenophobic stance she's taking. You cannot drag her for opposing anti-ICE protests by deploying the kind of xenophobia that makes the fucking protest necessary in the first place. Watching people pretend to give a fuck about what ICE is doing to immigrants in one breath and calling for Nicki Minaj's deportation in the next reminded me to remind y'all that many of the people covering ICE's crimes right now are doing it simply because it's what has national attention right now. It's not because they actually care about immigrants, our rights, or our humanity. Don Lemon had 9 million things he could have dragged Nicki to hell and back with. 9 fucking million things. But he chose to say she's an undocumented immigrant, she doesn't like African Americans, and that she should be deported. Jesus fucking Christ. There is so much wrong with this response, and we're gonna break it down piece by piece because I am sick but not surprised at the virtually non-existent pushback I saw to his remarks. I am am compelled to point out that Dawn's response did exactly what Nicki's did. Instead of fighting on the merits, Don Lemon chose to shine a bat signal in the sky to activate the us versus them mentality. Don Lemon chose not only to emphasize that Nicki was an immigrant for seemingly no other purpose than to implicitly question her right to speak up at all. He framed her as an undocumented immigrant, which she is not, and then as not liking African Americans, as grounds for arguing that she should be deported. This is fucked up on so many levels. What does it say about Don Lemon's own politics, or the politics of anyone who could cover the anti-ICE protests in one breath, then call for the deportation of an individual immigrant because he doesn't like her or what she stands for in the next? Do you understand the humanity of immigrants, or don't you? Do you understand and oppose the evil that is ICE and deportation, or don't you? Do you think immigrants deserve equal rights, or don't you? Do you think immigrants should have the right to free speech, the right to speak up, the right to be unfucking likable, or don't you? Nicki Minaj is not an undocumented immigrant. Even if she is not a US citizen, she is still not an undocumented immigrant. Those things are not synonymous. But the idea that if she were an undocumented immigrant, because she's now pissing you to fuck off, you should be able to throw her out of the country is xenophobic as fuck. And that kind of thought process means you are far more aligned with the ICE agents that you are protesting and turning your noses up at than you think. Don Lemon could have emphasized that Nicki Minaj was an immigrant to rightfully point out the hypocrisy in an immigrant opposing anti-ICE protests. But he instead chose to respond with xenophobia, highlighting his own hypocrisy. We should be able to call out the hypocrisy and contradictions of Nicki Minaj of all people, calling for anyone's arrest, calling someone a thug, and doing what is tantamount to supporting ICE without leaning into the same kind of prejudice that fuels a system that criminalizes immigrants, rounds us up, subjects us to human rights abuses, and throws us out of the country where we built our lives. Nicki Minaj is being a fucking hypocrite, and it's her own fellow immigrants she's hurting and advocating against. But Don Lemon decided to frame her not as a self-hating immigrant or an embarrassment to Black women, but as being specifically anti-African American. He didn't frame her as anti-African American because that's what best described the beliefs she's espousing. Nicki Minaj's remarks and behavior have been squarely anti-Black, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, and pro her own bottom line. But Don Lemon framed her as anti-African American specifically because it's a dog whistle, meant to automatically get people on his side by activating that population that spends all their time implying that the rest of the Black globe is somehow all anti-Black and or anti-African American and an impediment to the advancements of Black Americans in order to justify othering us, hating us, and creating even more division in the Black community. This kind of thinking is not only an internet phenomenon as many like to pretend, and it has become increasingly more popular, more dangerous, and more pervasive. And too many people carelessly invoke it and legitimize it in order to win petty confrontations that they could have won on the merits. It's curious to me that Black Americans have been calling Nicki Minaj the queen of rap repping Queens, New York for more than a decade. But the minute folk finally realize that Nicki is a problematic bitch, suddenly she's strictly a Trinidadian immigrant. We have to cut this shit out. And we have to stop bending over backwards to legitimize prejudice on all sides. I don't give a fuck how valid your prejudice feels to you. There are Black people of every fucking persuasion saying and believing pro-Black shit and saying and believing anti-Black shit. Cherry picking and choosing only negative anti-Black individuals to represent Africans, Caribbean people, or Black immigrants of any kind is a choice, and it is a xenophobic choice. The idea that immigrant or non-American Black people are especially anti-Black in a way that Black Americans are not is a crock of shit that I am tired of seeing trotted out by even intelligent niggas who should know better, but cannot fathom that their feelings are not always fact, and that your feeling can be based in prejudice. Using any and every negative individual experience or perception of a Black immigrant as license to judge, condemn, and write off all Black immigrants is the same kind of grievance politic that has Nicki Minaj showing her ass. Nicki Minaj isn't being an idiot bitch because she's an immigrant. She is not being an idiot bitch because she's from Trinidad. And she's not being an idiot bitch because she suddenly has a problem with African Americans. Nicki is being an idiot bitch because she's an unprincipled reactionary who can be sold to the highest bidder who strokes her ego and promises to help her. Just like Nelly, just like Snoop Dogg, just like Lil Wayne, just like Clarence Thomas, just like a bunch of non-immigrant black people who have disappointed the fuck out of us tap dancing for Trump. You cannot be an ally to immigrants in the same breath that you weaponize the same rhetoric and tactics that Republicans, the fascists, and the ICE agents deploy and subscribe to. I do not have a problem with Don Lemon, but it is important to see this issue clearly and really start to examine how American attitudes as a whole have contributed to the dangerous times that immigrants and US citizens as a result all find ourselves in.